Hi, I'm Robin Austin, and I'm standing in front of the Anne Spencer House in downtown Lynchburg, Virginia. Anne Spencer was a famous poet that was published during the Harlem Renaissance, and her home behind me welcomed many famous people, including Langston Hughes, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Martin Luther King Jr. My discussion board is about Phyllis Wheatley, who was the first Black woman to be published in the United States. And I believe she helped to pave the way for future generations of Black women like Anne Spencer to be able to publish their works.
Phyllis Wheatley's story begins in Africa in the year 1761. When she was approximately 7 years old, she was captured and put on a slave ship heading for Boston, Massachusetts. John and Susanna Wheatley came to the slave market that morning looking for a young girl. There they met Phyllis. She was named Phyllis after the slave ship that brought her to Boston, and she was purchased for 1 shilling. Phyllis Wheatley was taught to read and write by the daughter of the household, Mary Wheatley, and she learned to read and write within 6 months. The family treated her as a member, and she learned astronomy, geography, ancient history, English, Latin, and most of all, she enjoyed reading the Bible. And within 4 years, she could read and write English fluently. In 1769, she translated from the Latin Odes by Ovid, which was published in Boston. But in December of 1767, in the Newport Mercury, she published her first poem, which was called On Messrs. Hussey and Coffin, and this was published when she was 14 years old. She was the first Black woman to ever have a poem published in the colonies. With the publication of her poetry, she became somewhat of a celebrity in Boston and was often invited to dinner in private homes. So she was treated as an equal, but still they treated her as a slave. And because of that, she always declined the seat offered her at the table and requested a small table be set to the side where she would eat apart from everybody else. And that was to show that she still was a slave and she was not free. In 1770, Phyllis wrote a poem on the death of the Reverend George Whitefield. It was so popular that it was printed in 10 editions over the course of the years in Boston. In 1772, Phyllis Wheatley had to meet before a review board because people were questioning the authenticity of her poetry. People didn't believe that because she could have written this poetry, one, because she was a slave, because she was Black, and they just didn't think she could have written it on her own. So she had to sit before a review board that included the governor of Massachusetts, the lieutenant governor, 5 judges, 7 reverends, 3 lawyers, which included John Hancock, and then John Wheatley. After a very long and arduous review, they wrote a public letter that verified Phyllis Wheatley had written these poetries, and she was the poetess. In 1773, the Wheatley family took Phyllis to London on a ship actually called the London, and on her leaving, she wrote a poem called A Farewell to America. We don't know if the Wheatleys knew this or not, but a law had passed in 1772 in Great Britain called the Somerset Decision, which freed all slaves in Great Britain and also stated that as soon as a slave set foot on the soil of the British Islands, they would become free. So as soon as Phyllis arrived in Great Britain, June 17, 1773, she became technically a free woman. While in London, Phyllis was able to feel as a true equal with other people and no longer an outsider. And then in 1773, she and the family returned to Boston, same year as the Boston Tea Party. But on returning to Boston, the Wheatleys gave her freedom. Phyllis Wheatley married John Peters, April of 1778. He owned a grocery store and was a free Black man. They had to flee Massachusetts to avoid the invading British during the Revolutionary War, and she ended up dying in poverty, a widow, and she had lost all of her children. We know that Phyllis Wheatley was an influential woman of the American Revolution era. She's called the mother of Black American literature, and she published 145 known poems. She had been seen by historical figures. She wrote letters back and forth with historical figures such as George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. and the monument stands to her in Boston along with Abigail Adams and Lucy Stone.